Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me here today. So I have some ideas that I'm going to share, and I wanted to just start off by saying that I started working on this presentation together with Valerie Haven from UMass Boston. Unfortunately, she was not able to make it here, but she did give input, and if you have any questions, either for me or for her, I'd be happy to compile them, and then we can pass them along to her. And so with that, I'm going to talk today about inclusion in both online and face-to-face courses. My area of expertise is with fully online courses, but I'm going to be looking at it from both perspectives. And I'm also going to be looking to you to share any ideas that you have in your professional capacities. Out to you, I believe, through the conference organizers, but they're also available at the bit.ly link, which is bit.ly/course inclusion, and that C and I are uppercase and it is case sensitive. So it's course inclusion with a capital C and a capital I. So before I start talking about some of the strategies for course inclusion, I wanted to talk about the difference between accessibility and inclusion. They are sometimes used interchangeably, but they're actually very different terms. So before I give my understanding of accessibility and inclusion, what do those terms mean to you? Can somebody give me a definition of what accessibility means to you?
Barriers to content or
So removing barriers. Okay, great. And what about inclusion? What does inclusion mean to you?
Thinking of different people who have barriers that have visual or hearing impaired or physical, people are coming at the same area.
Yeah, so looking at the barriers and versus looking at all the people and who is it that's trying to access your course content. So this is one of my favorite infographics of all time. So it looks at children who are trying to watch a baseball game. In one instance, they're starting out watching the baseball game over a wooden fence, and they have some crates to stand on. They're looking at the game, but the children are of different heights, and the same crate does not give them access to the game with equal amount of ability. They are not all able to see the game when they're standing on the same size crate. So they have this. So the resources have been distributed equally, but there's no equity in this access to the baseball game. The children are not. The smallest child is not able to see what's going on. So then we have the second model, which is the traditional model of accommodation in higher education, where course resources are redistributed to provide equitable access. Now all children are able to see the game, but we don't know how long did it take for that smallest child to be able to get the accommodations that he or she needed in order to be able to see over the wooden fence. Did he or did that child need to disclose something about himself to be able to get the accommodation? Is there a stigma associated with disclosing that he needs that second crate? And is the taller child feeling jealous? Why did my crate get taken away and given to this other child? So there are a lot of social dynamics that are going on with the traditional model of accommodations, with the traditional model of providing retroactive modifications. Now we rethink the paradigm of how the children access content. We remove the wooden fence, we provide a chain link fence instead. So the course goals and objectives are still being met. The fence is still gonna stop any fly balls, nobody's gonna get hit in the face, but all children can now watch the game from the beginning. There's no stigma, there's no time delay, and so we have removed the barrier to access. So now we are including everybody, and at the same time, we're providing access to the information. So who are the students that we're thinking about when we're thinking about inclusion in our courses? So the first group of students that we think about are the students that need accessibility and possibly accessibility modification. So those may be students with disabilities. So we can have students with visual impairments, and our keynote this morning did an excellent job of providing us with information about visual impairments, and that visual impairments are not all the same. Visual impairment, just because somebody has a visual impairment does not mean that they're completely blind, but it does mean that maybe they need bigger text or they need different contrast for their text. We have auditory impairments. So same thing, different levels of auditory impairments, and what is it do those students need? If we're in a live classroom, what assistance do students with auditory impairments need? If we're in the online classroom, what is it captioning, transcription, what is it that is necessary? Ambulatory, so that's physical mobility and how to get around the physical space. Later this afternoon, there's going to be a session from some folks at UMass who have worked on campus planning and access from that perspective. And finally, a group of students that is often forgotten in accessibility discussion is the cognitive impairments, the hidden impairments, learning disabilities, and students who need different ways to access course content without a visible impairment that is sometimes easier to explain. And also it's an area where there is more stigma associated, and makes it much harder for students to self-disclose or to want to self-disclose. And with that in mind, I'm just going to provide you with one quick statistic. So in higher education, about 11 to 12% of undergraduate students have a documented disability. Depending on the survey that you use, 60 to 80% of those students choose to not disclose their documented disabilities. So these are disabilities that they may have gotten accommodations for in K-12. When students get to higher ed, they don't want that assistance. They don't want the stigma associated with it. And so they choose to not disclose the disability for which they could be receiving legitimate accommodations. So one group of students that we're looking at is the students with documented disabilities. But then we have a whole other set of students. Accommodations, Office for Students with Disabilities, do not apply to first-generation learners. First-generation learners who don't have the family support to know how to study in higher education, to know which office to go to know where to go for help, to know how to obtain resources, to have the financial backing to get the best laptop. The list goes on of the challenges that first-generation students may have as they enter higher education. English language learners, the same modifications that may be assisting students with auditory impairments, closed captioning and transcription, really helps English language learners for whom reading content may be much more helpful than hearing it, or doing the two together. It may help them to learn language, to be able to understand the video or the lecture that they're watching in their online class. My father, starting to get a little bit older, he hears fine most of the time, turns on closed captioning for every movie because he is not a native speaker. And between that and getting up there in age, it's a lot easier for him. When it's older movies and closed captioning is not available, it's much more of a challenge. So for any student that is maybe a mature student or an English language learner, the same modifications that would have helped students with disabilities are also going to help those students. And So that's the last bullet point, the non-traditional, post-traditional, or older learners. And in online education, there's a lot of older students, a lot of students who are not as comfortable with technology, a lot of students for whom finding time to study may be more challenging. So when we're talking about course inclusion, we're talking about everybody who may be in the classroom. So we're talking about both learning needs and learning preferences. And when we talk about learning preferences, we can think about this from Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. So this theory is not new, or it's been around for a while. It applies to both K-12 education, higher education. There are some really terrific surveys out there that you can take to see what your own learning preferences would be based on the types of, it asks you questions like, given 3 different activities, how would you prefer to cook a meal? Do you want to read the recipe? Do you want to watch a YouTube about the recipe? Do you want to follow along somebody else cooking the recipe? And it's kind of fascinating to do that for yourself and see, what is my intelligence? Where am I strongest? It's great to develop areas of weakness, but when you need to learn content, it's much easier to learn that content when you approach it with your strengths in mind. So are you picture smart and really need the visual support? So this is where inclusion and accessibility start to diverge. If you have a page that is all text, it is very easy to make that page fully accessible, because all you need to do is make sure that the text is readable. Everybody can read it. It's an accessible page. Is it an inclusive page? No, because if there's no images, you're excluding everybody who benefits from images as a learning aid. The same thing with multimedia or audio content. If you record an audio lecture for students, it's going to work really well for other students. Maybe not the best strategy for some, but then if you're creating multimedia content, then you need to make that multimedia content accessible. So it's looking at course design from all the different perspectives. Are there options within an online course that's really bound to a computer that's going to allow for a student who is a kinesthetic learner to move their bodies and interact with manipulatives? Are there kits or objects that can be mailed out to remote distance learners for them to interact with content? So with that in mind, I'm going to go through a few tips and techniques for both on-ground and online courses to maximize the inclusion in those courses. And as I go through these, please provide other suggestions. I'm really happy to hear from you in the audience. Who here works primarily with on-ground, face-to-face courses? And what about online courses? And what about no courses at all? You don't actually work with course design, you look at inclusion and other perspectives. Excellent. So we have a really good mix of some people working with face-to-face courses, some people working with online courses, and some people looking at inclusion outside of education. Well, within education, but outside of courses. So for all courses, when you're addressing your students, you want to make your students feel like they're welcome in the course. So rather than saying, in this course, the students will, instead, in this course, you will. They're very small modifications, but make the student feel more welcome. When you present course policies, make those course policies feel supportive rather than punitive. So work will be accepted through the due date, and then there will be no makeups ever. You're encouraged to submit your work by the due date. If you submit your work late, you will have an opportunity to earn 50% of the grade. So the policies are there, the policies haven't really changed, but the way that the policies are presented make the student feel like they are in control of their education. If you have an older student who has a life and a job, maybe they can't meet the deadline, but then they know that they can still submit their work and they can still get at least partial credit for their work. When you're talking to your students, think about cultural and socioeconomic differences. A great example that I once heard was of a physics instructor who wanted to present roller coasters as an example in a course. And it was a physics concept. So all they wanted to talk about is potential energy and how the roller coaster rolls down the hill. But they started the course by saying, who has been to Disney World? Well, they just lost at least half of the room. Maybe the students haven't been to Disney World. Maybe they can't go to Disney World because of socioeconomic reasons or anything else that may be a barrier for them to go to Disney World. Well, how about showing a YouTube video of a roller coaster instead? If the child has been to Disney World, they will connect with that. But if they haven't been excluded. They're still connecting with the content and they're still understanding what the instructor is trying to present. And providing student choice. So this is really my passion, is universal design for learning and giving learners an opportunity to choose how they're going to both gain knowledge and share knowledge with their instructor. How are they going to demonstrate that they have met the course learning objectives? So is there a variety of learning activities? So the most basic example that is used, and I think a little bit overused, is instead of a paper, let a student submit a video. How many of you have heard that as an example of universal design? A few. So that's a good one, but the options are much broader than that. So if you have any kind of group work, then you can let students within the group choose different roles that lets each student contribute in a way that works best for their learning strategies. And then when you're presenting information to the students, it can be really hard for an instructor to present information in different ways for each piece of content. But by varying the content across the different units of the course, so maybe there's a lecture in one unit, and then there's a video in another unit, and then there's a podcast in another unit, and then there's a guest speaker, and then there's a field trip. And by having all different types of content presented across a course, then students get a chance to really excel at different moments across the course, and together as a class they can build knowledge. And then when we're looking specifically at face-to-face brick and mortar courses, think about the layout of the classroom. Is the physical classroom laid out in a way that's going to work for any student who walks, rolls, glides into the classroom? If it's a lecture-based class, can students sit both near and far from the front of the room in a way that works for them, regardless of how and where are they sitting? When you are speaking to learners, is everybody in the room able to interact with the visual elements? So at the beginning of this presentation, when I was talking about the infographic of the children watching the baseball game, I was describing what was on the image while talking about the image, so that even if somebody wasn't able to fully see the image or not see the image at all, they could still understand what I was talking about. So I was providing alternative text for the image while I was talking. And I think we think a lot about alternative text in materials that are shared digitally, but we sometimes forget that in face-to-face settings, that alternative text still needs to happen. It's really important for formulas. We see a lot of instructors teaching formula-heavy classes, and they're writing the formula, and they say, okay, and here's X, and over here, and where's here, and what is there, and what equals to what, just by reading out the formula, everybody in the class, whether it's because they're all the way in the back, whether it's because they forgot their glasses, or maybe they're just having a hard day, providing that information to all students. And classroom demonstrations, same thing. And finally, giving students a lot more choice in terms of how testing and assessment happens. Some students test really well, and for others, it provides a lot of anxiety having to be in a timed, proctored test-taking situation. So by rethinking assessments, thinking about what the learning objectives of the assessment are, and giving students more choice in terms of using resources to still be able to demonstrate their knowledge, and having more flexibility in the timing for demonstrating their knowledge. For online classes, a lot of it is going to be the same ideas, but for the online environment. So the flexibility that we talk about for the physical environment, in the online environment, that's going to be easy and consistent course navigation, so that students know where they need to find their information without having to learn how to find information, so that they can focus on learning course content, not learning course navigation. Course netiquettes are really important in online courses, so that students understand the appropriate ways to communicate in the online environment. A lot of learners come into online environments from social media, and they don't realize that acronyms are not an appropriate way to post in online course discussions. So explicitly telling students, as well as modeling how to interact in course discussions by writing in full sentences, using appropriate and correct grammar, avoiding jargon, and teaching students and how to treat each other with respect, even if they're not seeing their peers in a face-to-face environment. And providing students an opportunity to practice with technology. When you have older, mature students participating in online courses, they may not be as comfortable with the learning management system or with any of the third-party technologies that are used in the course. And just like open book and take-home tests are great for face-to-face courses, untimed assessments are great for online courses. With an online course, you basically have to assume that everything a student does is open book, because even if you limit what they have in their on their one device that has the learning management system, you can't control what other device they're using unless you have really intense proctoring systems with cameras watching everything that the student does. So assume that it's an open book test, and give students the time to be able to calmly complete the assessment. So what are other ideas that all of you experienced people in this room have for online classes, face-to-face classes, or any class whatsoever? What are some of the strategies that you've used in teaching yourselves or working with instructors, supporting instructors for those courses?
So I'm talking about Starlink, and we onboard face-to-face classes online practice that we use in whether it's experience right off the bat. So if they're brand new to online or they're teaching with a profile only online, it's very different from the two other institutions. So we immediately put them on their training. Not everyone has to go through that. It's kind of tied to the but we repeatedly hear feedback from folks that are either skeptical or unsure of teaching online, or they've done it all before and they're just looking for a refresher. That being put in the student seat is really, really helpful and insightful for them. We do make them use learning styles or learning practices with the beginning to kind of just be a little introspective, and then going forward, whether it's starting new content from scratch or translating their content from one level to the other. And we repeatedly hear folks, they'll say, I didn't do that, or I always assign that paper, and why can't they do it another way, or why can't they do the project into more of the class, or I repeatedly have to struggle with this one assignment, and if we just changed it a little bit, then students will like that or other options. Having faculty that try on with their assignment to students really works well for us.
No,
Not always, it's not 100%, but it is helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Put faculty in the student seat. Any other ideas from your experiences of help? Yeah.
Definitely multimodal learning, but introducing the different modes in a way that doesn't increase the cognitive load itself.
Mm-hmm.
For example, some people learn better through transcripts, reading transcripts. Some need video, some need contextually relevant imagery. But if you try producing all of those and giving them to the learner at the same time, the cognitive load is just too high and you end up losing stuff. You're not absorbing.
Yeah, so something that we have suggested to instructors that want to, like, let's say they have a PowerPoint presentation and they want to create a recorded video from that, a narrated video. They also want to share their PowerPoint slides, both in PowerPoint and in PDF. That's great, but we say, okay, attach it all to one item in Blackboard. And then to a student, that is all one piece of content, and then they choose which of those pieces of content they study from, but they don't feel like they have to open all three files because they realize that it's really all one lecture just presented to them in different ways. Okay, so now I'd like to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about Ally as a tool for inclusion. So we have a rep from Ally with us. So I already grilled her a little bit this morning, but I'm sure you can catch her later in the day if you have questions specifically related to Ally. So in Amherst, we turned Ally on in May. I know some other campuses have had it on for longer. And so right now we're in the process of figuring out our strategy of what we're going to do with the courses, with the course content that needs retrofitting, and how we're going to fix the most egregious mistakes and then go forward from there. But what I wanted to talk about is not how we're going to be fixing files, but what we can do with Ally and how it helps not just for ADA compliance for our courses, but also for course inclusion for all the learners that may be in a course. So at the very basic level, Ally checks documents for accessibility. It looks at files that are added to Blackboard, so Microsoft Office files, PDF files, image files, and some aspects of files that are built within Blackboard itself. With those files, Ally creates alternative formats. So if you have a scanned PDF document that is just an image, the Ally will OCR the file. It will provide you with a download. It will also provide you with an HTML version, an EPUB, electronic braille, or an audio version of that file. And it will help you correct the file. So it will give you the steps for fixing a file that, so if you have a file that was just an image PDF, and then you perform OCR on that file and you put it back, it will then provide suggestions on how to tag the file, how to create heading styles, how to add alternative text for images. And as it goes through the process, Ally has a percent gauge where it tells you how accessible is the file, anywhere from 0% with a red gauge all the way to 100% with a green gauge. So Ally does not work with any multimedia files at this time, so it doesn't work with any audio, any video, so it doesn't pick up anything related to captioning, and it is an automated algorithm. So it will have both false positives and false negatives. It can't know what it doesn't know. So if you have a Microsoft Word file that has no headings, but seems to be just one continuous paragraph of text, it's not going to tell you that there's anything wrong with that file because it doesn't know that there's supposed to be headings within that document. And on the other side, it will also have false negatives where the file is actually built correctly, but because of how the algorithm is running, sometimes it flags certain things as not tagged when actually they are. So it's a really good tool used within the understanding that it has certain limitations. So for, oh yeah, go ahead.
Just an update on the audio videos. We did just introduce support for YouTube videos. YouTube videos will to reports. Ally can now tell you whether or not caption files associated with them. The important point is we don't count caption files that are automatically generated by YouTube. So they're looking specifically for YouTube to generate caption files.
So does Ally know if you went in and edited the YouTube file?
Yeah, so if you go into the it's constantly checking.
So like if you start with the automated option and then make manual edits, then it will give you a thumbs up. That's awesome. And how does it, so does it look like at embedded YouTubes, at mashup YouTubes, at web links?
So if it's an embedded YouTube, a mashup, anytime that it's posted by YouTube, we assess it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be adding video, and then there we want integration with that right now as well.
Echo 360?
I think it's on the list.
Okay. All right. That's great. So how does Ally help those students that I talked about at the beginning of this presentation? So if you go through and follow Ally's recommendations, it can really help preclude the need for alternative modifications down the road. So if the files are already accessible, they don't need to be made accessible later when the student self-identifies. It provides students with immediate access to files. So those alternate formats, one thing that I may have failed to mention earlier is those alternative formats are available to students whether the instructor does anything with the file or not. So if you put an inaccessible file into Blackboard, students still have access to those automatically generated alternative formats. So those files are there for students right away. But those are not files that have had any kind of manual intervention. So if you have an image PDF, Ally will make you an OCR, a file that has had optical character recognition. In a second, I will talk about why that is a limitation. So students will have access to a screen reader and Braille documents. They will have immediate access to those documents. However, when you have a file that's had optical character recognition, and it used to be an image file, picture a page from a textbook. So if you have a page from a textbook, it's going to have columns, it's going to have pop-outs, it's going to have headers, it's going to have footers, it's going to have chapter headings. When you perform optical character recognition, everything that's text becomes readable text. When you have a screen reader or an audio file from that file, it's going to read all the text straight down the page and then continue to the next page. So wherever the page ends, mid-sentence, it's going to read that sentence to the middle, and then it's going to read the footer of the page, then it's going to read the header on the next page, and then it's going to read any kind of chapter heading, and then it's going to continue to the next sentence. So you can see how that could be a real problem for a student that's trying to listen to an audio file and learn from that chapter heading, from that chapter. So what we're talking about when we're talking about our process for modifications and using allies, we're talking about, okay, starting with the file, and then on top of that, doing manual edits to make sure that the reading order is right, that any footers and headers are marked as footers and headers and maybe skipped in the reading order. So then when you have a really well-built PDF document that is manually put back into Blackboard, then you have audio files that are available to all learners. So they're available to learners with visual disabilities, but they're also available for English language learners who may want to have an audio version while they read the actual file. They're available to students who have long commutes, students who may want to review their material while they're in the car or at the gym. Those audio files are then available to everybody and become a really excellent study tool. And they're available to students with reading difficulties, students with reading comprehension difficulties or dyslexia, those students with cognitive impairments who may be the most reluctant to disclose their disabilities when they encounter content that is difficult for them to interact with. Yeah.
The spirit of universal design. So at the medical school, all of the lectures are captured using Adobe 360. Then we make just MP3 and MP4 versions available to them. They like to listen to them in the car, on the treadmill. They like to speed them up to like 3 times speed, so that they can, try to cram in everything that they're being expected to learn. So works for everybody for different.
Exactly. And then when you have that fully accessible document, it becomes a searchable document. So it's not just that you can convert it to an audio file. If you have a term in the medical school and you just need to review something specific, you can then search that PDF document and jump right to the chapter section, or you can search the lecture. You can index the lecture. You can create a table of contents with bookmarks so that students can access the information when they're writing their paper. They can read the section that they really need for the section of the paper that they're reading, or when they're studying for the exam, they can review their lecture and they can jump to a section of the reading that relates to the lecture to provide them with extra information. So when we're looking at accessibility, we're really looking at providing a better learning experience and a more inclusive learning experience for everybody in the class. And Ally is just one tool that can be in the toolbox if you work with it, because nothing automated, at least not in this day and age, is going to completely solve your problems. So that is all I had for today. I'm happy to answer questions or have more of a discussion about how inclusion works on your campuses, what you're doing for inclusion. Yeah.
Because I work in digital media labs, so I don't work with specific I don't work in a course, I work with teachers.
Yeah.
Are there, like, is there an example of surveys you might provide the teacher to give to the students to help them at least identify or say, help me understand how to teach you better or to address these kind of issues? That's sensitive, but also not.
So like, there's a really good survey that actually Kelsey pointed me to initially for multiple intelligences for identifying your own learning style. So that may be a good one to start with, because I think not all students are self-aware enough to know what their learning style is. So that might be a good start. I can dig a link out if you want to just write down your email.
Actually, in response to that, there's actually efforts with artificial intelligence to actually figure out the mastery level based on the mode that's presented to the learner, and then it will just switch it and then give the learner an opportunity to switch the mode back or whatever. But it's more skipping the survey altogether, knowing how using the artificial intelligence to understand what level of mastery they have, and then just changing the content so that's content that's best for them. And then obviously giving them options to turn it off or change it later on. Or the mastery level starts to drop off. Maybe they just need a change, something new, fresh and new.
Definitive fullness, or is it specific?
Technically, it's a research study.
Do you have any suggestions of how to assist the faculty transitions when they have an own course and they have to go to their accessible? How would you
Start small. Start small and look for the biggest problems first. So what are the biggest barriers? So like one of the workshops that I facilitate is on an accessible syllabus. So because it's such an important document, and it's actually a document that's very easy to make accessible, but find that a lot of faculty don't use Word to the best of its potential. And so with an accessible syllabus, part of it is things like heading styles in the document, but then part of it is some of those language things that I talked about at the beginning, so the inclusive language, inclusive policies. And then, and this is for face-to-face or online courses? For any courses, yeah. So, and then kind of looking at all the files in a course. So start, like if there's image PDFs, scanned image PDFs, those are going to be the worst. And then kind of go from there. Have them work on one unit at a time, 1 unit per semester. Not tackle everything because it's daunting to look at all aspects of accessibility and all aspects of universal design, all aspects of inclusion, and try to completely revamp the course you need like the whole summer.
We actually avoid trying to do that and invest those resources and effort into just having the new course, our course materials designed accessibly from the start, instead of trying to go back and remediate, because even the content has a shelf life, and it's not the best value to go back and do that. So fix the major problem first, which is accessibility, the development of materials being accessible, and then go back and decide whether or not there is a need or a demand to have old materials remediated.
Right, and so with Ally, that's actually going to be part of our strategy. So we're going to be providing training for instructors on how to work with Ally to create accessible content for any new materials, and then we're going to be working with a team of graduate assistants to retrofit the worst documents going back. But training has to be part of that component, because otherwise anything new is not going to be any better than what used to be there.
Well, going forward, is there a way that Ally can say you can't put this up because it's not accessible? It can't block it, right?
That's-
In case that
Yeah, that's not something that we're doing at this stage in this new class to
in place, because there does have to be more of that conversation on campus. Ally really relies on having the institution having good policy and good practices and good plan for how they're gonna execute that strategy.
We have a great policy.
Right.
Well, and I think the Ally indicator is already a good start. So we just deployed it in May, and we've already had a few instructors going, what is that? Do I have to do everything? And so right now we're kind of in the don't worry about it phase, because some instructors are like, oh my God, I have to fix all of this. It's gonna take me forever, and if I can't do that, I'm like, okay, it's okay. You don't have to fix it all right now. Right now it's for awareness, but the awareness is getting out there. They're seeing those red gauges, and so I'm hoping that as they upload new content, they'll see those red gauges and we'll work with it.
Did you give them a heads up that this was coming, or did you just kind of?
We did an email blast, and ran a couple webinars.
Yeah.
But faculty don't read their emails. Or come to webinars. So, we run 500 courses over the course of the summer, and I think we had like under 10 faculty attend the webinars. So,
Usual subsidized.
yeah. But you target key departments, you target program coordinators. That's going to be the next phase of our rollout.
The process, right?
Yeah, definitely process, and every bit of change is helpful. And as far as like campus-wide policy, it's really good to have a plan, because it shows that you're working towards a goal rather than floating. So there's no other questions. I think lunch is in 10 minutes.